folks, and you can see I am back for class time. We have had a couple of weeks off. I've had some health issues, and bear with me, I have pop-ups happening. But I'm back to, I won't say normal because I'm still kind of dealing with a few things, but for the most part I'm back to where I was. And I wanted to continue this because this is really why I started the channel here. I know most of what I did early on was what a lot of people do. They talk about happenings in the news, they talk about things that are going on, reactions to that, and so on. But there's a lot of people doing that, and history, political science, the social sciences is my passion. Now, there's a lot I can talk about with current events and so on, but history, in my opinion, is not being completely and properly taught. For those who are following the channel, you'll know last time we left off with really the aftermath of 1812 and inklings of a division forming between the North and South. We did have an admission to the Union as a slave state, but a declaration or a law stating that no more slave states could come in, and so on and so forth. Now, following that, we have the Indian Removal Act. This is in 1830. That's President Andrew Jackson. And basically what had happened is the federal government and the state governments were starting to see that we're still growing. There are still people coming to now the United States, fleeing other nations, looking for economic opportunity, and so on and so forth. But the territories we had, that we controlled, our states and our territories, there were a lot of Native Americans. So in 1830, President Andrew Jackson urged Congress to sign on to and pass the Indian Removal Act. This would take the Native Americans from their lands in the southeast, predominantly Georgia and that southeastern area, to the Great Plains. Ironically, they assumed the Great Plains were barren. If they could look at today and how much of the food we eat is produced in the Great Plains, they'd feel a little foolish. They designated that there would be a section of modern-day Oklahoma designated as Indian Territory, and established the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Now, there was, of course, some opposition to this. We have the 5, quote, civilized tribes: Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. They were already assimilating to a large degree into American culture, but they still held their land, and the states wanted it. So in 1828, with gold being found in Georgia, the desire only grew through the Indian Removal Act in 1830, and ultimately to a Supreme Court challenge by the Cherokee Nation. Supreme Court found that only the federal government, Congress, could enter a treaty with another recognized nation, and the Cherokees were. So they ruled that Georgia, the state, could not force them off their land. Now, Georgia and President Jackson at the time agreeing, wanting this land, they ignored the ruling, and they just kept going. In 1835, there was a small number of the Cherokee that signed a treaty with the U.S., and this was treated as the entire Cherokee Nation signing on to this treaty. And by then, it was now President Van Buren, sends General Winfield Scott and 16,000 troops to basically round up the Native Americans. They're put into camps at first and then marched west to their new home. This is known as the Trail of Tears, because over that 800 miles from the Georgia area to now what is Oklahoma, a quarter of their population died. Starvation, disease, injury, number of causes. It wasn't really the end, though, because as we know with anything like this, it's never going to be forgotten. And it shouldn't be. I'm not going to get political on this. It happened. Slavery happened. Jim Crow happened. Now, as the U.S. grew and as we grew in our ability to act as a country, a lot of these things have been addressed. Have they been addressed perfectly? No. Will they ever be addressed perfectly? Doubtful. Man is an imperfect being, an imperfect creature. But we have worked to address this. What we saw, though, with Reaction to the Trail of Tears, is that we're never going to be able to control 100% of life in the country. The Seminole, for example, under their chief Osceola, resisted, and they resorted to, I can't really believe no one just 70 years removed almost from the Revolutionary War could see this coming. They resorted to the same tactics they taught us to use against the British. Guerrilla tactics. Vanished into the trees, and in this case the Everglades. They would make strikes. Even when Osceola was captured in 1837, they continued to do this, proving that they knew that what had happened was not right. They knew what had happened was, in some cases, illegal. And that they just weren't going to be forced off their land. Ironically, when you look at something like this, we look at the island of Manhattan, and people, even still today, are coming back to Manhattan was stolen from the Indians for a few beads. Well, it wasn't a few beads. It was precious gems, precious stones. It was paid for. Now, the other side to that story, let's say this. Whataburger Fancy Ketchup Packet. This is an item of value. It has great value in the time and place I'm holding it. So we'll look at the late 1700s, early 1800s, and let's say this is a lump of gold or silver, platinum, it could be a diamond, anything of that nature. I offer to give you this in return for a section of land, in this case, the island of Manhattan. You agree. I hand you this. You leave the island. You don't get to come back hundreds of years later and say, well, that was unfair. Funnily enough, if you watch the show Futurama, then it parodies this with Mars and their natives. But the simple truth is that the island of Manhattan was purchased. Later on, Indian lands in Georgia and Florida and the surrounding areas were stolen. We can't change either of those things. What we can do is learn from them. Okay, both things. I'm not able to speak to Manhattan. I don't know exactly what was exchanged to get the natives on that island to leave to allow the Americans to develop it. But I know that the Indians in Georgia, Florida, and so on were treated horribly. Since I can't change that, I can learn from it. Ironically, today we have people who are demanding that all vestiges of history they deem offensive be removed completely from public sight. For crying out loud, Abraham Lincoln High is a school named after Abraham Lincoln. I believe a high school, might have been a middle or elementary, I don't know. Had the name Abraham Lincoln removed from it because people found that offensive. Abraham Lincoln, the man who freed the slaves by decree, is now offensive. This is the danger of forgetting the history. This, what we've discussed today, is not a good part of American history. It's a dark stain on our past that we treated those Native Americans in Georgia and the surrounding Southeast horrifically. But to remove all vestiges of it because it offends some people to see what was done in the past is to say that they're going to forget what happened. There are things in my 43 years I wish hadn't happened. But if I simply forget about them, I'll end up repeating them. There's a reason the saying exists. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Unfortunately, the people in the 1820s and 30s didn't remember examples from history, from all over the world, of Rome brutally removing people from their land so it could become part of the Roman Empire. Persia doing the same. England doing the same. Great Britain just taking territory. They forgot this. They chose not to remember it and did the same thing to the Native Americans in the southeastern U.S. If we forget these things now, it will happen again. And I don't want to see that happen. I am never going to claim that American life is perfect. Never going to say that the United States of America is a perfect nation. But as Reagan said in the 80s, we are still the shining city on the hill. We are still an example of liberty, of freedom. We're not perfect. We need to address certain things. And the proper way to do that is with discussion, with debate, which includes allowing people to dissent. That wasn't done in 1830, in 1832, in 1835, in 1837. It was just whatever the government wanted got done. And unfortunately left a stain on our history, but we can learn from it, and we should. If we don't, then we disrespect all of what happened. I've talked long enough for today. This has been a short one, but we are nearing the Civil War, which will be at least 2 videos. We are going to look at further westward expansion next week, primarily Oregon, and the infamous Oregon Trail, where you have died of dysentery. Until then, make sure and let me know what you think. As always, be civil in the comments. We're not here to scream and yell like toddlers. We're here to discuss, dissent, and debate, as I mentioned earlier. I want to know when someone disagrees with me, when they dissent, so that we can have that debate as 2 civil adults. So please do so. Please also remember to share this video to widen the conversation, to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you're aware of all new content. And until next time, have a wonderful day.